So at this point, I would like to invite Hanna Zack Miley to turn on her camera and microphone as I introduce her. Welcome, it's so good to have you there. Great. Okay, so Hanna was born in Germany in 1932, and in the summer of 1939, her parents sent her to England as part of the Kindertransport, in which the lives of 10,000 German Jewish children were saved. Later in life, Hanna returned to live in the same town where she was born, reconnecting there with her Jewish family heritage and her German neighbors. She made this move as part of her ministry of reconciliation, which she shares with her husband, George, a ministry which has taken them to more than 100 countries. What a story, and we're so honored to have you join us. So please take it away, Hanna, over to you.
Thank you, Amanda. Hello, everyone. Can you see me?
Yes, everything's good. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. Yeshua, and these times of sharing fulfill a deep longing in my heart. I have found so much joy in listening to the stories shared on previous webinars. And I'm glad to tell you a little of my own journey as a witness to our multifaceted Jewish identity. I was 7 years old when I lost my sense of being Jewish. Ever since that abrupt separation from all that was safe and secure, I think I have been looking for a place to shelter. It was on the evening of July the 24th, 1939, when my parents stood in tears as I clambered up the steep steps of the train, steam rising beside the platform of Köln Hauptbahnhof. I didn't realize that moment would be our last glimpse of each other. I experienced disorientation, but I was oblivious to the abyss that was before my parents and 6 million other Jews. I was born in a German Jewish family in 1932, 11 months before Hitler seized power. We lived in a small, idyllic German spa town near the Belgian border, a place that attracted German tourists for the healing quality of the pure air and the peaceful hilly countryside. My father, Marcus Zack, owned a business on the main street selling housewares and furniture. My mother happily fulfilled her role as a housewife, served customers, formed deep friendships among the Jewish community, and also with her German neighbors. They were older, doting parents. I was their only child. My father was part of the leadership in the small local synagogue, and we kept strictly kosher home. I remember feeling safe and loved, sitting next to my father at the kitchen table. We were observing Pesach. He with his big steaming cup of fresh coffee, sweetened with spoonfuls of sugar, and me with a small milky cup of coffee, copying him as he broke matzos into his cup, both of us dipping our spoons together. In my imagination, I can still taste those warm, sloppy matzos. The few memories of my mother are suffused with love, but I grieve their meagerness. My mother remained a shadowy figure until 1992, when I met Lisbeth. I think the Lord knew my heart's longing to connect with the lost personality and character of my mother. I was with George, my husband, attending a small reunion of Jewish survivors in Gmünd when I met Lisbeth. We were sitting next to each other, eating cake and drinking coffee. She had been our living maid until I was 3 years old, and I didn't remember her. but she had loved my mother, and her memories and stories spilled out for hours. I think my father was deeply committed to Jewish practices and traditions, but my mother, I listened intently as Lisbeth traveled back in time, recalling her experience of Pesach in the Zack household. Accommodation was made for her Gentile identity, and a special cupboard was reserved for her food. Sometimes when my father was away on business during Pesach, my mother would say, "Come, Lisbeth, let's do something nice for ourselves." And they would sit together at the kitchen table, take the loaf of bread out of Lisbeth's cupboard, slice to pieces, smear a generous pat of butter, and enjoy. Lisbeth gave me a precious gift, a connection with my parents and our Jewish roots. And within my personality, I see something of my father and my mother, both the careful keeper of the law and the boundary-pushing free spirit. Kristallnacht, the night when synagogues and Jewish businesses were vandalized and burnt, was the catalyst for our family's relocation to the big city, Cologne. It was also the tipping point for my parents' decision to send me to safety in Britain. They secured a priceless place for me on the Kindertransport, a rescue effort that saved the lives of 10,000 mostly Jewish children from Germany, Austria, Czechoslovakia, and Poland. I lost my language, culture, religion, the love of my parents, and a familiar way of relating to God. Britain was at war, fear of invasion was pervasive, and in the late 1930s and early 1940s, the way to deal with trauma was to suck it up. I can remember hearing, "What a lucky girl you are." My preferred method of coping with life was to turn away from the past and take on the identity of a British schoolgirl. So, where was God? In my first 7 years, I think something of my parents' heritage had been deposited in my soul. But now in England, a tug of war was going on within. Sometimes I turned to God in my distress, but most of the time I nurtured my victimhood. I would say, why me? My teenage years were fraught with anger and hatred towards Germany and Germans, and deep down I felt my parents had abandoned me. I didn't know where to go with all that darkness. I was coming to the end of coping when, in the mysterious ways of God, I encountered the living Jesus. I was a teacher in West Sussex when I heard for the first time that I could lift up and give the ugly weight of wrongness I was carrying to Jesus, Jesus hanging on the cross. I gave him all that hatred, outrage, anger, and I experienced his forgiveness, his inner cleansing. That was the beginning of my healing journey. How did I come to embrace my Jewishness? I'm awed by the mystery of God's ways. He brought me, despite all my vulnerabilities, into wholeness, into the freedom of following him. And surprise of surprises, the way led through Germany. It is one thing to forgive from a safety of distance, but something else to go back and confront the actual places where my parents and I had been wronged, to begin to forgive at the physical scenes of abuse, injustice, and death. In the year 2000, the Lord nudged George and I to return to Gmünd. I remember standing again in the schoolyard where a small group of Jewish children had been pushed into the center of a circle. German children surrounded us, dancing and singing hateful anti-Semitic songs. 62 years later, I was back in the same playground, praying with my husband, asking God to cleanse the past, to give the grace to forgive, and to heal the wounds of those Gimun children who had drunk the poison of hatred, and asking him to lift the shame from their children and from their grandchildren. In that intimate, private experience with God, we were totally unaware that a ministry of reconciliation was being born as we stood in that small, drab, concrete square, the scene of past hate and contempt near the German-Belgian border. While visiting Gmünd in 2008, Gerda, a close German friend, asked me a question that broke through all my defenses and released me to begin researching and writing my story. Looking back, I can see that the long and painful process of digging up our family's history and writing a Garn for Ashes, or Meine Krone in der Asche in German, was a tool God used to lead me to mourn and embrace my parents and to restore another facet of my Jewish identity. We went back to the place where my parents had been perished by gas, Chelmo, Poland. And in remembering that event, in that place, there was a deep sense of further healing, a restoring of my relationship with my parents. Since the year 2020, like most of us, my movements have been restricted: no travel, no public events, and limited fellowship. And yet, new and unusual opportunities opened up. Through Instagram, I met Amy, a historian, researching and writing about the Kindertransport. I'm amazed at the new level of interest in the history of Jewish child refugees. And at 89, I am one of the youngest Kinder. And in 2021, I am a living eyewitness that is rare. Amy has introduced me to her colleagues and helped create an open-air exhibition, Endless Tunnels, telling the story of the Kindertransport, and she invited me to send a few concluding words to read at the end of the opening ceremony in Berlin. My brief words of affirmation for the act of remembrance ended with a Birkat Kohanim. The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Looking back at my story and selecting the little bits to share with you has given me another opportunity to ponder, who am I? All these years, I have been searching for home. Over the last months, reading the Yad Yeshua website, talking with Mark Kinzer, and hearing the stories on the webinars, they have quickened my soul. It has been a revelation to learn of the Jewish fathers and mothers who believed and followed Jesus and who were leaders in their churches. I am discovering my roots, taking my place in God's wider purpose. I treasure the acceptance among us, the oneness in the midst of our different callings to the synagogue, the Messianic synagogue, and the churches. Thank you.